Hi, I'm Roxy. This is my latest painting, and while I play the creation footage, I'm going to talk about how to get good reference. The obvious places, but also some unusual places where you might not have thought to look. Now, if you've been painting for a bit, you'll know that the better the reference, the better the painting turns out. It's not a matter of copying reference straight. Besides, you'll never find the perfect reference at the perfect angle in the perfect lighting. So you'll end up sourcing multiple references anyway, and this will take you a chunk of time. But hopefully I can save you some by pointing you in some good directions. I'm going to get the most obvious one out the way first, and that is of course Pinterest. As of December last year, Pinterest had over 240 billion images. That's almost double the amount of images that even Google Images has. Google Images only has about 136 billion images right now. And obviously, because Google automatically pulls images from websites, a lot of its content will be completely irrelevant. You know, like pictures pulled from news articles, charts and web graphics, product pics, GIFs and memes. So not stuff that lends itself to being good reference. Pinterest, on the other hand, doesn't automatically pull images. People purposefully pin them, so they're not going to be random web graphics. And because it's an image-first platform, the images at least tend to be visually pleasing. The other advantage that Pinterest has is a dang good algorithm. Now, in a previous video, I showed you how to work the Pinterest algorithm to find what you need. So I'm not going to repeat myself here, but I will put a link in the description to the video where I demonstrated it. So Pinterest is always my first stop for reference hunting. But I do need to add a caveat to my zealous endorsement of Pinterest, and that is that Pinterest is becoming overrun by AI-generated images. I didn't realize it at first because, well, it's not like the images are impeccably labeled or anything. So I guess I must have unwittingly repinned some AI images, and because the algorithm is so efficient, I'm seeing a lot of that stuff now, which is bad if you're looking for, say, pose reference at a specific angle and you start seeing hands with extra fingers and other questionable anatomy. I think most of what's on Pinterest is still good, but it's just something to keep in mind now. You know, that just because something looks like a photo doesn't mean it was a real person that was photographed. It could have been generated by AI, and thus the anatomy may not be correct. That brings us to another good place for reference, and that is anatomy books. When it comes to anatomy books, there are a handful of classics that a lot of artists recommend. Some of them I agree with, and some of them I think are a bit overhyped, and quite frankly, there's better books now. But if you're willing to invest a little bit of money into buying some books, I can particularly recommend a few that I use. I'll put links in the description. The book I used mostly for this painting was Stonehouse Anatomy, which someone in my Discord actually put me onto. This book has a lot of female back reference, which helped me sketch this, which became this. Of course, before you even get into the anatomical details, you need pose reference. Now, plenty of artists shoot their own reference. Famous poster designer Drew Struzan used to, when he was commissioned to do an Indiana Jones poster, for example, he'd dress up, he'd literally cosplay Indiana Jones and then photograph himself in the action pose he wanted. And then he'd use that as reference for his painting. And fine artists like Aaron Westerberg and Patrick J. Jones and Jeremy Mann, they all hire models and either paint them live or photograph them to paint later. Personally, I think that's far too much effort, not to mention I'm a lousy photographer, but it clearly works well for them and a lot of other artists, so it's an option. Another more hands-on kind of reference is articulated mannequins. You're probably familiar with the old wooden ones, but nowadays we get much better ones, like these that are more anatomical. You also get some that come with props like guns and swords, so that's a fun option. So those are physical options, but you also get digital posing tools. In a previous video, I demoed the free version of Terawell's design doll, but that seems to have changed a lot. The last time I went into it, which was fairly recently, I couldn't even figure out how to change the body structure, so I'm thinking maybe that's a paid feature now. But regardless, I gave up on that and tried a bunch of others, and out of the selection I looked at, I think Magic Poser is probably the best one. Unfortunately, the female body isn't free, and I found it didn't offer the amount of and accuracy of anatomical detail that I was looking for. With my particular pose in this painting, when I lifted the arms at that angle, the anatomy went a bit wonky, which I guess is understandable. It's just a 3D model with hingeable points. It doesn't have the actual bone and muscle under the surface to make it accurate. You know, when muscles contract and not contract, what's the word, relax. Still, when I contacted Magic Poser, they were very open to criticism about the anatomy, because I was complaining that the shoulder was halfway down the arm, and I got the impression that they sincerely want to make it better. And I really like that. I love it when a company takes pride in what they do. So I'd recommend them anyway, because, you know, even if I had to resort to the anatomy books for the finer, more accurate detail, for posing, it's just fine. Unfortunately, there's no PC version. I used the iPad version, but you can also get it for Android. I guess if you really wanted, you could use a mobile emulator like Mimu or BlueStacks to get it on the PC. Another app I really liked is called Handy Art Reference Tool by Belief Engine. It's very cheap and it's amazing for hand poses. In this painting, I did both of her hand poses using this tool. It also has some head poses and a male foot. For some reason, the female foot costs extra. This one is on iPad and Android, but it's also on the Windows Store, so presumably you could get it as a PC app. And if you don't feel like fiddling around with the pose yourself, you might want to get some pre-made poses. And in that case, I've got a couple of good options for you. The first one is a website called Figurosity. I mentioned this briefly in my Path of Exile painting video, where I used it for the archer pose. I also actually used it for my chunky mermaid painting that I did. Basically, it's a site with a lot of pre-made action poses made as 3D objects, and you can swivel the character around to get the angle you want. It's free, so the price is right, but you can also pay to get the naked version or the flayed écorché versions. And now, the one thing is, as with the digital posing software that I mentioned before, these are models, and models are only good as the 3D modeler. So if you really want high quality poses with good lighting and 100% accurate anatomy, then you probably rather want to go for a couple of pose packs. Now, Team Bradley has pose reference packs you can buy with very good lighting, not just figures, but also landscapes, and also tons of free packs. So definitely worth checking out. The other really good one is Grafit Studio, particularly their action poses. Of course, if you're skint, I have a life hack for you. Just visit a stock photo site and literally search for the pose you want. For example, here I'm on Shutterstock. I just typed gun pose, and if I scroll down, maybe I find something cool. Here we go. And you don't need to buy a high-res version of this for it to be a useful reference, as long as you don't copy it exactly. Change the face and the clothes at least. Otherwise, it's not really fair on the photographer and very probably a copyright issue. You don't want to get sued, and you also don't want to be an asshole. So, steal ethically is what I'm saying. And an even more pro way to steal is from 3D stock sites, because obviously it's a lot harder to prove that you stole it if there's multiple angles. A lot of these sites have 3D turnarounds, so you can actually swivel the model around to the angle you want. And that's super handy. I'll put a few links in the description to 3D stock sites I've personally used. And still on the theme of expert stealing, another option is Hollywood movies, if nothing else for the cinematic lighting. I'm not talking about crappy low-budget movies, but in a good film, and when I say good, I don't care about the story, I'm talking about like a good cinematic film. I often find myself wanting to pause on a scene so I can paint it. And that's because cinematographers and video editors are artists in their own right. In a good film, not only is the positioning of everything in the frame very carefully planned, but every scene is painstakingly lit to draw attention to the focal point, and the scene is also color graded for the perfect ambiance. And as 2D artists, we can learn a lot about color and light from analyzing movie stills. Fortunately, there's a great website where you can search for scenes. Like here I've searched for lightsaber fight. I mean, look at this magnificent composition and lighting. If I wanted to do some fan art, this is also a good place to find reference from a different angle. You find a lot of fan art is based on official promo shots, so they all look very samey. But you can come here and find a character from a different angle than anyone else has drawn. And while we're on the topic of movies, an amazing source of landscape reference is drone footage. In fact, the sky that I painted in this piece was pretty much stolen from this drone video taken by my friend Bitwonky. I've called this painting Roshanek, which is the Persian origin of my name Roxanne, which literally means brilliant dawn. And when I saw this video footage he'd captured, I thought, now that is truly a brilliant dawn, and I knew I had to paint it. And I must say I'm quite pleased with the result. I'll definitely be looking at more drone footage when it comes to backgrounds from now on. So I'll put a link to Bitwonky's channel in the description. There's not a lot of videos, but what he does have is very high quality, and I'll also put some links to other drone footage sources. The next one on my list is along the same vein, but instead of drone footage, we're zooming out a little and we're going with satellite imagery. I can't take credit for this idea. I actually picked this up from a video made by Becker, which I'll link to below, where he shows how to use Google Earth to cheat up some quick city backgrounds in perspective. It's quite genius, and he is also quite a character, so you might want to give that a watch. Then the next one on my list is games. Graphics are so realistic now that games are definitely a viable source of reference, especially because you can typically go into God mode or photo mode or whatever and find just the right angle, and in some games you can even change the weather and the lighting. Even games with cartoony graphics can be useful. For example, a game I recently discovered called Townscaper. It's super cheap, and you can design these cute little towns and position them at the ideal angle for your painting. You want a town in the background, there you go. It even lets you export the towns as 3D objects, if that's your thing. For this painting in particular, I used one of my favorite games, Conan Exiles, for reference. The scenery in this game is breathtaking. The anatomy modeling is the best I've seen in a game, and the clothing design is just spectacular. This scantily dressed lady you see dancing around is wearing a beautiful loincloth. And here she is wearing a different loincloth because there's a lot of options. And you can see how I took elements from both of those to come up with my own loincloth. And that's not the first time I've used reference from a game, and it won't be the last. So gaming is definitely an option if you haven't thought about that. So the time lapse is nearing the end, but just two more things before I show you the final painting. One, I want to let you know that I've created a supplemental blog post containing everything I've talked about here, as well as a whole bunch more that I didn't have time for. So I will link to that post in the description as well. And number two, I intend on maintaining this post as a kind of directory. So if you have links that I haven't mentioned or thought of, please comment below so we can all check them out. And if there's some really cool ones, I'll add them to the directory. And here's the final painting. Hope you enjoyed the footage, and hopefully I've provided some useful resources. Thank you to my patrons. They can find a high-res version of this painting in their treasure trove of Dropbox goodies. And also the brush that I used to create the magic tattoos. And thank you for watching.